FM News Talk 97.1.
On-demand audio.
Tuesday, the governor signed the sweeping gun measure, the nation's toughest. It includes a ban on the possession of high-capacity magazines. Specifically, magazines with more than 7 rounds will be illegal under the new law. The problem, as the statute is currently written, it does not exempt law enforcement officers. The NYPD, the state police, and virtually every law enforcement agency in the state carries handguns that have a 15-round capacity. Unless an exemption is added by the time this part of the law takes effect in March, police would technically be in violation of the new law.
Brilliant. And that's what happens when you rush to pass something that, A, you haven't read thoroughly, and B, well, you shouldn't be passing it anyway. So now they have to amend what they just passed. 866-455-9797. Joining me now, and I often refer to him as a walking human encyclopedia. I extensively cite his work on this show and on the program, and he is one of the foremost voices concerning the Second Amendment and firearms, and his work, just Google him. John Lott, good afternoon to you, my friend. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, very nice. Appreciate you having me on.
Of course. I would pay to see you in studio with Piers Morgan, by the way.
Okay.
I would pay to see this happen.
Well, at least we got to watch you the other night. So,
you and I spoke the other day on this particular subject of gun control and the Second Amendment, and you had made some very interesting points. I mean, first the president comes out with his 23 his executive directives, or however he wants to label them. Some of them are quite, we can get into a little bit of that. Some of them are really questionable, especially as it involves health care. But when he made his initial speech before signing these executive actions, there were a lot of numbers that he threw out there. He talked about how there were, and we mentioned this on the show yesterday, there were 40% of gun purchases, how they're conducted without background checks. And we need to strengthen our background checks and expand them, and, talked about high capacity magazines and so on and so forth. And there was a lot, if not all, that the president said in his remarks that you took issue with, especially those numbers.
Right. Well, I think pretty much every number that he used had something major wrong with it. The first thing that he was pushing was these universal background checks, and he made a couple claims to support it, basically 2 empirical claims. The first one was that 1.5 million people who were prevented from being able to get guns because they had some disqualifying case, either a criminal background or some type of mental illness issue. And that's simply false. About 99%, over 99% of the 1.5 million cases were false positives. What the correct term is, rather than saying that they were prevented, he should have said there were initial denials. So if you go and get a background check when you buy a gun, there's about 8% of cases where they can't complete the check right away. Most of them take about 3 days. And then there's about 1% that they deny. But in those cases, it goes through different levels of review even after the first 3-day period is over. The first review is done by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms itself. And in that case, 94% of those initial denials are basically found to be incorrect, and so those 94% of those denials are thrown out right at that point. And then for the remaining 6%, they're sent to the BATF field offices, and about 3%, or about half the remaining number, are found to just be wrong. And then finally, when you go through it, you basically are down to 0.1%. But here's the way to think about it, probably the simplest way, and that is, a lot of people may remember Ted Kennedy, the late senator from Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
There were 5 times where he was placed on a no-fly list and stopped from flying on a plane. Now, if the president were to take those cases, he could go and say, well, we stopped 5 flights by terrorists. But Kennedy just went on the next flight. And that's the same thing that happens with these initial denials. Just because you're flagged to begin with, just as the late senator was flagged 5 times and stopped from boarding the particular flight that he wanted to go on, he made a call, the right people and Homeland Security and what have you, and then was able to go and fly. And the same thing is true with these individuals. The problem here is that the way these checks are done, in Kennedy's case, apparently there's somebody in the country who has the name Ted Kennedy, who has certain things that worries security officials. And the same thing is true with many individuals. Your name, if there's somebody else in the country who has your name or a very similar name, maybe a different middle initial or something, who, let's say, has a felony conviction or has a misdemeanor conviction that would be disqualifying, then you're going to be in for a hassle when you go and you buy a gun, because they're going to put your name in, and it's going to show a little flag there, and most likely you'll get dinged with one of these initial denials.
And you had made the point, too, that for some individuals, this may be more than simply an inconvenience. In some issues, this could be a case of life and death.
Exactly right. And that's the overall problem with the way Obama approaches this. He only talks about the benefits from passing these laws, never acknowledging that there may be costs. And you're pointing out a very important cost. So for these 8% of people who most of them are going to be delayed for 3 days, or the 1% who could be delayed for months, most of those people not being able to buy a gun is an inconvenience. They'll live with it, but it's an inconvenience. A small portion of those individuals, maybe a woman who's being stalked by somebody or somebody else who's being threatened, it's just not an inconvenience. Being delayed for being able to purchase a gun for self-defense, as you say exactly, could be the difference between life and death on their part. And so you have to weigh the costs and benefits when the president says, if we can save one life, then we should pass these laws. It makes about as much sense as me saying if one person dies because they're not able to defend themselves with a gun, we shouldn't have the law. The question ultimately comes down to what's the net effect. And I think when you look at these background checks, there's essentially zero criminals, or is about as close to zero as you can get, who are actually stopped as a result of background checks. There may be some stupid criminals out there, but there are not many who are so stupid that they actually go and try to go through a background check when they have a criminal background. When you go through these numbers in 2010, for example, there were 76,000 people who got initial denials, a little bit over 76,000. Of those 76,000, the Department of Justice only thought that 62 of those cases were worth referring to prosecutors. And of those 62 cases, only 13 ended up resulting in convictions. And so, and if you actually look at those 13 cases, most of them aren't what you would think they are. They'd be cases of some 65-year-old guy, one that I remember reading, who 45 years earlier had gotten into a fist fight in his front yard with his brother. Some neighbors had complained about the ruckus with the two beating each other up, and the police had come by, arrested them. The two brothers pled guilty to misdemeanor domestic violence. So 45 years later, this guy's wife apparently was receiving threats. He bought her a gun, or was trying to buy her a gun for her protection, filled out the form, didn't realize that among the covered things was this 45-year-old fist fight that he had gotten in with his brother. And the prosecutors said that he had committed perjury when he had filled out the form because he hadn't put in this previous misdemeanor. Wow. And so perjury is punishable by 3 years in jail, and that's what he got for it. But you see a lot of cases like that where people who, it's really hard to think that they really represented a danger to anybody at all, are the ones who get ensnared with this. People who just didn't realize that they were covered, not the criminals who knew that they did something wrong and knew that they couldn't go through the background check.
Exactly. We hear this, the president also in his remarks, he made mention of mental health, talked about that in conjunction with the NICS database and that. Now you and I and a lot of our listeners out there, they're aware that if you're declared mentally unfit by a court of law, you're going to be placed on this list and you're not going to be able to purchase a weapon when they run a background check. But none of that would have helped in the cases and these incidents that we have seen unfold over the past couple of years with these criminals out there getting guns, many of them illegally, and shooting, a mass amount of people. That it wouldn't have done anything. And the president, there are laws in place that have even tried to incentivize states to add these individuals, if they are declared so, to this database in a quicker fashion. And even after that, they haven't done it. That seems to me one of the biggest problems in this, because individuals think that even if you have a criminal record, you can still go out there and buy a gun. And it's simply not the case.
No, it's completely false. Look, this whole mental health issue is filled with lots of tough questions. One of the issues is, and you would think the president would be sensitive to this, given how he's been sensitive in other issues like AIDS and what have you. When he was a state senator in Illinois, he didn't want to have people who had AIDS having their records turned over to public health officials who wanted to be able to monitor their contacts and make sure that they weren't spreading the disease. He thought that would go and create a disincentive for them to go and receive medical attention to begin with. But he doesn't seem to believe, or doesn't recognize anyway, that the same type of trade-off may be present for people with mental illness, if there are going to be certain disqualifications that they may face. Look, we're only talking about a very tiny percentage of people who have mental illnesses who are actually going to represent a threat for others. And so, again, you're talking about empirical questions. When we go and have a lot of people who are going to now be disqualified from owning guns, it's not just them, but it's going to be people who have similar names, as we talked about before. Now you're going to have a bigger list of disqualified people. You're going to have more people who are going to run into problems even when they don't have any history of that, just because they may have a similar name to somebody who does. And you have to take those types of trade-offs into account. And, the bottom line is there's been a lot of empirical work by economists on background checks to see, and criminologists, to see whether that they matter in terms of crime rates. And it'd be nice if there was some magic bullet there, but there's simply no evidence that either state waiting periods or state background checks or federal background checks have had any beneficial impact on crime rates.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly it. I wish that I would love to have you on for an entire show sometime to kind of go over all of this, because there's so much. You've written so many books on this: More Guns, Less Crime, The Bias Against Guns. Folks, make sure you get some of John's books out there. You can follow him on Twitter. And your latest in the Wall Street Journal, The Facts About Assault Weapons and Crime, is definitive reading for anyone who wants to engage in a conversation about this topic. And I so appreciate your voice and perspective and expertise out there. It's huge. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, maybe you can get me on Pierre's show sometime.
You know what? I'm actually trying, because I really, you need to get out there, and I would love to see that head to head. That would be epic. John, thanks so much.
I'll know who to thank if it comes to be. So.
Yeah, they may be. I think they're going to be more scared of you than me.
Who knows?
Thanks again. We'd love to have you back. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.
Take care.